Hello there and Happy New Year. Welcome to the Weatherquest Farming Forecast. We'll take a look at the weather trends across the UK and a bit further afield for the next 4 weeks in just a few moments. But first, let's start on the other side of the world. It's been making headlines a lot over the last few weeks. Australia. They've had their hottest and driest year on record during 2019, and that has led to record-breaking temperatures so far this year, exceeding 40 degrees in many places, and of course wildfires. Now, from an agricultural perspective, for farmers in particular, it's estimated that about tens of thousands of livestock have been lost because of the wildfires, and the carcasses left behind posing somewhat of a health hazard. So there is some sense of urgency to try and dispose of those before things escalate from that perspective. But the drought and the wildfires, I mean, we've been talking about the drought for such a long time in Australia. You may remember back in August last year, we were referring to how that was having an impact on wheat production, for example, here. Well, that's leading to a milk shortage, and not least with the power cuts caused by the wildfires as well. That has led to a loss of milk production and affecting milk prices as well. And even looking further ahead, the heat continues. There was a bit of relief over the weekend with a cold front moving into the southern parts of Australia, but that's retreating, the heat's rebuilding, and it's likely temperatures will reach close to record-breaking levels again later this week, which will only exacerbate the wildfire threat going forward, not just this week, but indeed further in the weeks to come. It is the summer season, of course. Now, one of the key aspects of the wildfires here, an interesting meteorological aspect, this graphic here from the Australian Met Service. So here we've got our wildfires burning, but the heat here is so intense that the air is rising very rapidly up into the atmosphere and cooling quite quickly as it encounters much colder air higher up in the atmosphere. That allows clouds to form. So all of this heat is actually fueling the development of pyrocumulonimbus clouds, or thunderstorms, that are developed because of these wildfires. Now, you may think that's a good thing because, of course, thunderstorms do bring some rain, so that may provide some relief. But actually, the rain coming out of these thunderstorms, they're very high-based, and the air down near ground level, of course, is very hot and very dry. Most of the rain is actually evaporating before it even reaches the ground. So the rain itself not really doing anything for putting out the wildfires, and you actually get some very gusty winds coming down out of these thunderstorms, which just exacerbates the conditions and spread those wildfires even quicker because they're being pushed along by the wind. Now, the other thing from these thunderstorms, of course, is the lightning aspect. And of course, where you've got lightning and very tinder dry ground, that sets off further wildfires elsewhere. And of course, these get fanned by the winds as well. So actually, it's sort of a constant feedback loop here, with wildfires developing thunderstorms, then setting off more wildfires, and so the process continues as well. And the smoke from the wildfires has reached South America, so traveling thousands of miles across the southern hemisphere so far, and they'll continue for quite some time. Now, closer to home, things are thankfully a lot quieter, but it's still a rather unsettled phase of weather we've been moving into over the last few days. Things did quieten down over Christmas, as we suggested, but now we're going back into a more unsettled pattern. That said, Wednesday starts off with this weak ridge over the southern half of the UK, but we are going to see a weather front pushing back up from the south. So by the end of Wednesday, I think rain pushing into southern parts of the UK, also into Southern Ireland, but still at this stage, Northern England, much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, probably a fairly quiet day on Wednesday. The wind's a little bit lighter, mostly dry, but there will be a few showers actually across the north of Scotland, and some of these a little bit wintry on the hills as well. Then as we go on into Thursday, there's a bit of uncertainty about the exact detail in any one place, but it's likely we're going to have quite a deep area of low pressure pushing its way in. So a spell of wet and quite windy weather, some hill snow in the north, 250 metres above, could see some significant snow for a time. And that may linger first thing into Friday morning. So Thursday's quite an unsettled day. There could be some very strong gusts of wind up the Irish Sea into parts of Wales, perhaps even into the Midlands as well, something to bear in mind. But by Friday morning, most of that all clearing out of the way. So any leftover showers first thing Friday should clear, and actually much of the day then will be dominated by this big ridge of high pressure building in. So most of us actually should have a fairly quiet day of weather on Fridays. If you're trying to get out on the land, I know a lot of the fields are still waterlogged after what has been a very wet autumn and early winter, but things should improve a little bit on Friday for doing things outside, perhaps some spraying, that sort of thing. Then by Saturday, things start to change again. So here's our ridge of high pressure. It hangs on in the south for much of the day on Saturday. You can see the main high here down across the continent, but already fronts pushing into the north and west. And eventually a weakening cold front will push its way southeastwards. So perhaps eventually getting a little bit of rain into the southeast corner by the end of play on Saturday. But most of the day itself will be dry. And then we're back into a run of westerly winds with showers coming in off the Atlantic. So it's quite changeable. Basically, one day we've got a spell of rain coming in, then you may get a day or two of ridged conditions in the south. while it stays fairly unsettled further north before the next area of low pressure starts coming in. Now, the trends into the early part of next week, this is just sort of an overview of the type of conditions we're expecting. It's likely early next week, particularly on Tuesday, quite a big and deep area of low pressure near Iceland. So quite an unsettled look across much of the Atlantic. Will be pushing areas of rain and low pressure down across the UK. So generally, the further southeast you are, the amounts of rain will be lower, but I think for most of us next week, we'll see some rain at times, particularly during the first half of the week. And you can see from the number of isobars here, it could be quite a windy spell of weather as well, as that high pressure gets shunted a bit further away onto the nearby continent. But it does look likely towards the end of next week, the end of the working week and into the weekend, that high pressure actually across Europe may start to extend back in again a bit more over the UK. So perhaps things calming down a touch, the weather fronts becoming mostly confined to the west of the UK. And even if they do make any progress further east, they're likely to be quite weak as well. So it's likely rainfall amounts by the second half of next week could be quite small across the east and the southeast of the UK, but potentially still quite wet, I think, across the north and west, where it will remain quite breezy here as well. So it's chopping and changing a little bit, but there are some trends to be had here. Now, in terms of sunshine, I know with a lot of this high pressure around, it's often been quite cloudy, a lot of moist air trapped underneath that high. The interesting aspect is the sunnier days come with the cleaner polar maritime air masses that come in behind each area of low pressure before the next low comes in. So what you can see here on our Ensemble forecast, this is for Bedford, but it applies for most parts of England and Wales in particular. Up here, we've got the maximum temperature for each day between now and say 10 days time, for example, and you can see how they fluctuate. So some days are fairly mild, and then you get days which are slightly cooler, such as Friday, when we've got more of a chilly northwesterly flow developing before the temperatures start to recover again on Saturday ahead of the next area of low pressure, and then they'll drop again into the beginning of next week. But most of the time they are near or above normal, so 6 or 7 by day as the sort of average for the time of the year, and occasionally getting into the low teens when we get those milder outbreaks ahead of each area of low pressure. But as I was saying, it's when you get the cooler temperatures you get the most sunshine. So you can see here, for example, on Friday with the chillier conditions, you've actually got a greater chance of getting more in the way of solar radiation, as you can see here for Bedford as well. And the same is also true for next Monday. Temperatures drop a little bit, and so you get more in the way of sunshine as well. Whereas when you get the milder conditions, you've often got a lot of cloud because it's all coming in off the Atlantic. So you can see the sort of yo-yo of the pattern over the next 10 days or so. Some days will be mild but cloudy with a threat of some rain, and then other days will be cooler but sunnier, but maybe with a little bit of frost, although I don't think there's going to be an awful lot of frost really for quite some time. So that sort of data, those tables I just showed you, they're available on the Weatherquest portal, and there's many more features on here as well. You can get the latest 7-day forecast, the ensemble data I've just showed you, but also jet stream animation showing you where the jet stream is right now with a little description as to what the weather patterns are doing as well. So plenty of information on here, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. Just give us an email, info@weatherquest.co.uk. We'll set you up an account, we'll show you what we've got on offer, and hopefully you can find some useful information on here to help you make your important decisions going forward in time. So the outlook then for Europe over the next few weeks, this is for week 2, so this is next week running from the 13th to the 19th of January. The big area of red here, that's where pressure is higher than normal, so a very strong signal for high pressure to dominate across much of Europe. And here in the UK you can see we're sort of flirting on the margins between the high to the southeast and the low to the northwest. So in general, the closer you are to the high, the drier the conditions, and the further you are towards the areas of low pressure, the wetter the conditions you'll tend to find. And with the high pressure dominating in this sort of position, it's actually allowing a lot of mild air to be drawn right across Europe. Now, temperatures, of course, across Eastern Europe are still pretty chilly. In fact, some places have been struggling to get above freezing, but that's still a good 5-10 degrees above normal for the time of the year, hence why there's such a large red higher than average and normally showing up here as well. But much of Europe here above where they should be, and it's really down across Turkey and Greece where it's been quite chilly lately. We've seen some snow in places, and that's likely to continue for some time at least, because the pattern isn't changing in any great hurry. And just look how dry it is across much of Europe. Many places well below average, if not dry. The wettest conditions where you've got those onshore westerly flow, so the hills of Norway, for example, and indeed across the western side of the UK where we'll see rainfall above average, whereas on the rain shadow to the eastern side of the UK, it's drier than normal. And even further afield into week 3 now, and still that big area of high pressure dominating across much of Europe. If anything, it's making more of a progress further west, so becoming more ridged across the UK. So drier conditions, a little bit more settled, not completely dry necessarily, but overall things calming down. Still well above average temperatures across a good chunk of Europe showing up here, still chilly in the southeast, and still mostly dry across a good part of Europe as well. It's mainly northern Scandinavia and indeed the western side of the UK that sees above average rainfall during this spell as well. Now by week 4, just subtle hints at this stage, a long way off as we go into the early parts of February, late January or so, but the high pressure perhaps just retreating a little bit to the south, and that may allow more of a westerly flow, a stronger westerly flow to develop across northern and western Europe, allowing Atlantic lows to come back in. So it might start to turn a bit more unsettled. It's still a mild direction, so no sign of any major cold weather at all really for the next 3 or 4 weeks as things currently stand. But we might just see rainfall perhaps coming back to near, or again, still above average in the west, but the east losing that drier signal. So perhaps rainfall coming back closer to average and indeed extending across much of northern Europe where we've got those areas of low pressure coming in as well. So just signs that we could see some wet and perhaps quite windy weather late January into the beginning of February, but a long way off, and it may change a little bit between now and then. But the overall pattern really is more of the same, northwest, southeast split continuing for the next 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks. With rain in the northwest, that's where it's going to be most frequent. Generally drier, longer dry spells in the southeast, and rain here often will be a lot smaller than it will be further northwest. And most of the time, temperatures near or occasionally above average as well. There'll be a bit of snow on the northern hills, normal for the time of the year, but in terms of widespread snow at low levels or any major cold, no sign of that at all really showing up for the next month or so. So quite a bit going on, but normal conditions really for the time of the year. If you've got any feedback or questions, we'd love to hear from you. As always, you can contact us through social media. That's it from us. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.